Welcome to the Boring Biography channel, where we dive deep into the lives of famous figures and explore what truly shaped their journeys. Settle in comfortably, for today we will uncover the fascinating story of Errol Musk and the forces that drove their remarkable life. Why did Errol Musk continue when it seemed the odds were against him? What was it that kept him going, even when success was far from certain? Errol Musk entered the world in Pretoria in the old Transvaal, a place of wide boulevards, jacaranda blossoms, and quiet suburban routines that could feel orderly, even as the country beyond them was unsettled. Born in the mid-1940s to Walter Henry James Musk and Cora Amelia Robinson, the future engineer grew up in a household where English inflections met South African pragmatism, and the everyday business of making and repairing things was never far from the dining table conversation. Family ancestry tied him to English roots through his mother, who had come from Liverpool, and to South African life through his father, whose own path through wartime service and civil life left a steadying impression. Pretoria's measured rhythms, from school assemblies to Sunday errands, formed a backdrop for a boy who noticed how machines worked and how buildings fitted together, and who learned early that a firm tone and a careful plan could carry a person further than a loud boast. Those first years were unremarkable in the way that often shapes a character most, not with spectacle, but with a sense that problems have solutions if one is patient enough to trace the wiring. Musk's schooling took place in Pretoria, where classrooms were sunlit and exacting, and where teachers expected precision from a student whose interest in diagrams and practical tasks was already clear. Accounts from later years place him at Clapham High School in Queenswood, a detail that fits the quiet picture of a teenage boy walking through a neighborhood of neat hedges to a day of lessons that might end with a stop at a hardware shop. The trajectory to an applied education felt natural, and the University of Pretoria, with its technical offerings and straightforward ethos, provided a setting in which he studied electromechanics, absorbing the blend of electrical and mechanical thinking that would define his professional life. The future consultant learned methods rather than tricks, and in time, he favored the sort of work that began with measuring and ended with a certificate of occupancy or a humming motor that did exactly what it was meant to do. Musk's early adulthood intertwined personal and civic strands. In the turn of the 70s, he married May Haldeman, a young model and dietitian who had grown up partly in South Africa, and a household began that would soon include 3 children whose names would one day become widely known. Elon Reeve Musk arrived in the early 1970s, followed by Kimball and then Tosca, forming a trio that would remember both the bustle of urban Pretoria and the distinct temperaments of their parents. The marriage did not last the decade, and in the late 1970s, it ended in divorce, an event that introduced new arrangements, new addresses, and disputes that would echo through later interviews and memoirs. The family's separation and the questions of exactly who lived where and when have been written about in different ways by different people. But the fact of the split is consistent, and it is part of the shape of the life under consideration. Musk's public life took a more defined shape in the early 1970s. In the first months of that decade, he stood for municipal office in Pretoria and won a seat representing the Sunnyside area on the city council. The work was specific and local, involving permits, transport questions, neighborhood nuisances, and the usual frictions of city life that demanded an ear for detail and the patience to nudge small processes forward. As the decade wore on, he affiliated with the Progressive Federal Party, a parliamentary opposition whose complexities reflected the contradictions of South Africa in that period, and he later broke with that same party over its stance toward the constitutional changes that produced the tricameral parliament. The choice to resign in the early 1980s was explained at the time as a preference for incremental reform within the constraints of the day, a position that drew criticism from some and agreement from others. What he told reporters and colleagues then sits within a larger debate that scholars have traced through speeches, caucus minutes, and newspaper pages, and it shows a man inclined to stay with the argument until he could justify the line he took. Musk's version of civic duty sat alongside a business life that gathered scale. Engineering, consulting, and property development suited his temper because they rewarded method, foresight, and the ability to match a client's demands to a plan that a building inspector could accept. Descriptions gathered over time, including a recollection that his firm handled office buildings, retail complexes, and residential subdivisions, paint a picture of steady work and managerial competence rather than the frenzy of speculative risk. The late 1970s and early 1980s were his most prosperous years, and accounts connected to family recollections describe assets a person can picture with clarity: a plane, a yacht, a number of cars, and 2 homes that anchored a daily routine. Pretoria's growth and the rise of new shopping streets and office parks provided a stage for a builder's confidence, and the same qualities that made him effective in council meetings, persistence, simple language, and an eye for the smallest line on a plan, made him persuasive with contractors and surveyors. Musk's first marriage having ended, the late 1980s and early 1990s brought second chances and new ties. In those years, he married Heide Bezuidenhout, extending his household to include 2 daughters born of that union and a stepdaughter he had first known as a small child. The family arrangement reflected the practical accommodations of blended households, with school runs and holidays shared out, and the rhythm of a large family maintained by habit and clear rules. As the second marriage moved through its own seasons, distance and disagreements made their way into the home, and in time, this chapter too would end. The children from this period, like the 3 from the first marriage, would later speak about their memories with the variations that are common to siblings, one emphasizing protection, another remembering strictness, a third recalling travel and bright rooms. A household of many rooms creates many vantage points, and the biographical record does not force a single viewpoint on such scenes. Musk's name is frequently connected to emeralds, and it is worth treating that episode with steady attention. The mid-1980s found him dealing in emeralds from Zambia, an activity he has described in interviews with a matter-of-fact tone, speaking of acquiring stones, transporting them for cutting in Johannesburg, and selling them into established channels. Later, biographical work has drawn a distinction between owning a mine and trading emeralds or securing rights to production, and those who have investigated the matter have made clear that whatever the size of the profits or the convenience that cash might provide, the enterprise did not amount to legal ownership of a mine. The older man himself offered a telling line about the period, a spare sentence that nonetheless conveys the ease of liquidity in a property developer's peak years. "We had so much money," he said, a simple phrase that holds less heat than the more colorful versions of the same claim that appear elsewhere, and it anchors a chapter that has been more mythologized than most. Musk's civic positions and business tasks unfolded while his 3 children from the first marriage grew into their teenage years. Elon, the eldest, learned to program and read science fiction and would later leave South Africa for North America, with stories of scholarships, work, and student debts becoming part of his own retelling. Kimball prepared for a life that would take him through technology and into restaurants and food systems, and Tosca developed an eye for frames and scripts that would lead her into film. the father's insistence on practical competence, on getting the detail right and correcting a drawing rather than arguing about it, informed the tone at home. The family saw both constraint and abundance at different times, a pattern that fit a country whose own transitions moved in pulses. In a calm line that he gave to a reporter years later, speaking about life in that era, Musk said of the apartheid system that his children saw it clearly. They were confronted by it every day. A beat later, he added, they did not like it. Musk's time on the Pretoria City Council became more complicated as national politics shifted in the early 1980s. The opposition party he had joined wrestled with the government's attempt to recast the Constitution, and citizens argued soberly over whether an incremental change with separate chambers could be counted as progress or as delay. In that climate, his resignation from the party and his public rationale were reported as a sign of division, and they fixed him in a place on the political map that did not satisfy ideological purists on either side. A person who reads the council minutes and newspaper editorials of those years finds a tone both procedural and earnest. And it is not difficult to imagine an engineer's mind reacting against slogans and searching for a set of steps that could be completed with the resources at hand. The break with party colleagues did not produce a new career, but it did leave behind a record of someone who preferred precision, even when the vocabulary of the moment treated clarity as compromise. Musk's business life in the late 1980s and early 1990s continued at a quieter pace. Projects required the same attentiveness as before, and the economy's shifts forced a developer to weigh interest rates and tenancy with care. The tone of his public statements from this period, measured and sometimes dry, suggests a person who did not romanticize construction, but who appreciated that a completed roof and a paid invoice were simple goods. The years also brought maintenance of family ties across households and continents, plane tickets and phone calls, the exchange of school reports, and the settled rituals of birthdays marked and holidays planned. When the father visited, there might be a patient explanation of how a generator worked, or a suggestion for how to fix a door that would not latch. These are not celebrated stories, yet they are the sort of details that often shape how people view the man who stands at the center of a complicated family tree. A quiet reputation for knowing how to get a stuck mechanism moving again carried its own authority. Musk's name entered headlines far from development permits in the late 1990s. In an incident he has described in calm, clipped language across interviews, he confronted a group of intruders at a property in Johannesburg and fired his revolver in self-defense, killing 3 men. South African authorities investigated, and he was not convicted of any crime. The lines he uses to recall that day avoid flourish. "I took out the guy with the tie," he said, a fragment so plain it lands with the chill of a courthouse transcript. In the retellings, he returns to the basic elements: a hallway, a weapon, an urgent concern for a child's safety, an action that he claims was necessary. Whatever a listener makes of the mood and the moral, the facts sitting there are still, and the later coverage that looked back on that moment differs as much in tone as it agrees on the outcome. Musk's second marriage did not last, and the years after brought changes that have been described by relatives and reporters as difficult. The adult relationship he later formed with his former stepdaughter, Jana Bezuidenhout, led to 2 children and to public attention that was steady, critical, and, at times, deeply personal. Family members reacted in different ways, and the estrangement that had been described in earlier years between father and eldest son did not soften as this chapter unfolded. South African life continued for Musk in familiar places, with travel in the region and a return to routines that focused on property upkeep and quiet coastal towns, while interviews and profiles kept surfacing, sometimes tender, sometimes caustic. A man who had once handled council budgets and building timetables found himself answering questions about private life in studios and on podcasts, and the answers did little to settle judgments in either direction. Musk's public remarks over time have included sentences that reveal a fixed sense of self. In one widely noted radio appearance in the early 2020s, when asked directly if he was proud of his eldest son's achievements, he answered with a simple "no," and then offered an explanation that emphasized a family background of doing many things over many years. The phrasing was as unadorned as it was firm, and it reflected a habit of reply that used understatements and flattened affect rather than warm indulgence. In a family where the children had become public figures, those few words fed a large appetite for commentary. Yet they also fit the portrait of a father who seldom tailored his tone to a journalist's hopes. The impression of an unyielding temperament, which others have called stubbornness, aligns with a broader biography of a man drawn to directness and simple statements. Musk's recollections about wealth and scarcity have also drawn attention, and here again, the lines he chose were sparse, almost offhand, and clearly memorable. "We had so much money," he said, speaking of a period when emerald trading and property work created a flow of cash that was hard to miss. The sentence, which he offered while contesting and clarifying stories about mines and inheritances, stands as one of those remarks that take on a life beyond their setting. Later reporting and biographical work has distinguished between owning a mine and dealing in emeralds, and that distinction is important for anyone who seeks to understand the period with care rather than with slogans. The man who had spent his life on contracts and invoices found himself speaking about a trove that the public tried to turn into a symbol. The plainness of his phrase remains. Musk's views on the politics of his youth and middle age have appeared in occasional interviews, often shaded by the hindsight that age brings. He has said he opposed apartheid, and that his older children were aware of the system's daily presence and disliked it, while he also backed positions that favored gradual, structured change and resigned a party post when he believed its approach to constitutional reform was wrong. This mixture of opposition and incrementalism is neither rare nor easily summarized, and it sits uneasily in a world that prefers clearer lines. The man who worked with building inspectors and city planners valued staged progress, and he trusted procedures that could be ticked off in order. Not everyone in his circle agreed, and the argument followed him in the form of questions posed decades later by reporters seeking a single sentence that could encompass the era. The complicated answers, like the measured voice that delivered them, do not yield to quick headlines. Musk's relationship with his eldest son has long been a subject of curiosity and speculation, in part because the son's prominence throws light on every family angle. The father has given interviews that suggest concern or criticism, and the son has offered judgments that are severe and lasting. Over the years, reports have surfaced that the adult children offered financial support to the elder man during more difficult stretches, support that the eldest described publicly as conditional on behavior. The family's internal ledger is known only to them, yet the outward signs point to a bond that has frayed and hardened rather than mended. Even so, family life is rarely a straight line, and there have been mentions of gifts and visits that mark islands of civility in a wider ocean of distance. A listener who expects neat reconciliation or permanent rupture may find that this story resists both. Musk's later years display an odd blend of domestic routine and occasional public appearances that traveled far beyond Pretoria. Interviews with podcasters and television hosts took him from South African lounges to studios on other continents, and he used those sessions to revisit years of work, to defend choices, and to present a portrait of himself as a realist who still believed in clear rules. In some conversations, he recalled technical projects with fond precision, and in others, he addressed family disputes with a crisp tone that rarely lingered on sentiment. The contrast between a life of drawings and permits and a later season of microphones and headlines is striking only at first glance. The man who once measured cornices and checked cable gauges approached interview questions as another procedural task, to be managed with a steady hand and the fewest words necessary. Musk's name returned to wider news in the mid-2020s for a reason unrelated to property or old council seats. Allegations of sexual abuse dating back to the early 1990s, involving several children and stepchildren, were reported in an extensive investigation that drew upon court records, interviews, and social worker accounts. The elder man denied the allegations in categorical terms, calling them nonsense and worse, and stated that people with an interest in access to his eldest son's wealth were attempting to injure him. No criminal conviction resulted from past investigations, and the public record at present consists of accusations, denials, and inconclusive official outcomes. The subject is painful, and in a family already known for hard words and public distance, it was a further turn that ensured the father would not retreat quietly into private old age. Musk's life, even in later chapters, retained a civic thread that surprised observers who had long since stopped connecting him to committees and agendas. In the mid-2020s, as relations between South Africa's leadership and his eldest son became part of public policy discussions, reports described the father serving as a conduit for a phone call between the president of South Africa and the son whose companies and commentary influenced diplomatic moods. The detail suggests a continuing habit of brokering conversations when he believed a practical outcome could be reached, and a trust in his ability to arrange a call that might ease a tense situation. The action fits the picture of an older man who still regards access and persistence as tools to be used in service of some workable arrangement. Musk's quotes, sparse and sometimes severe, offer small windows into a temperament that privileges bluntness. The sentence about daily confrontation with apartheid and the calm line that his children did not like it shows a father willing to state the obvious without rhetorical effort. The brief remark about money and safes lands with a cool flatness that others have turned into a myth. The curt sentence about a tie in a hallway is the sort of memory that some would omit, yet he presents it as an unembellished fact from a day he insists required action. The set, taken together, suggests a man who sees little value in embroidery. For him, the operative detail is enough, and praise or apology sit beside it without reshaping it. Musk's methods remained consistent over time. He moved through problems by breaking them into parts and seeking the next attainable step. And he applied the same approach to conversations, both public and private. Engineers do not lower their voices for the sake of drama, and they do not raise them for effect. The father who measured beam spans and argued with surveyors about a boundary line brought that same basic cadence to family discussions and later to interviews that sometimes pressed him to perform. The choice not to bend to an expected emotional tone disappointed some and reassured others who prefer steadiness even when topics grow difficult. It is the sort of trait that, when present across decades, ceases to look like a tactic and begins to appear as a person's shape. Musk's domestic settings in later years favored quiet coastal towns and tidy rooms that reflect old habits, a place for tools, a place for documents, a place for photographs. He has spoken, in scattered minutes, of the satisfaction of a properly hung door or a motor that starts on the first turn, and the comfort of a well-provisioned kitchen with tea ready for a visitor. Such notes counterbalance the sharper headlines and remind a listener that lives are spent mostly in ordinary tasks that never make print. A man who was once busy with contractors and approvals often ends his days in reflective routines, reading the paper, checking on repairs, and phoning grown children and friends whose lives have become widely separate from his. The persistence of small rituals is a signature of age. Musk's career in property development, although never the favorite subject of profile writers, marked its own kind of influence because the buildings he planned and helped erect served ordinary needs. Shops opened, offices filled, families moved into new streets, and the city's fabric extended outward. There is a modest form of civic contribution in such work, and it is understood best by those who know the smell of concrete dust and the slow satisfaction of wiring that passes inspection. He did not write about planning theory, and he did not cultivate the language of visionary urbanism. He took the rolled plans, paid the site visit, and made the adjustments that the inspector demanded. Years later, the walls still stood, and the utility bills still arrived, and that is a kind of legacy that rarely asks for applause. Musk's political moment, though brief in the larger span of his life, also left behind a set of lessons he seems to have carried. Municipal politics trained him to listen to complaints without flinching, to keep track of small rules, and to separate what could be done this week from what required a longer campaign. The resignation from a party in the early 1980s, a choice shaped by an argument over sequence and sufficiency, underscores an abiding preference for incremental fixes. Whether that preference was adequate to the time remains a subject of debate that extends beyond any single councillor, but the record shows he made his line clear and took the consequence. In the story of a life, such clarity functions as both anchor and constraint. Musk's second household, like the first, required structure. Children needed schedules, budgets needed watching, and the strains of step-family life demanded an extra measure of patience from everyone. Decisions taken in the middle of such complexity, including those that drew criticism later, did not arise in isolation. The combination of work, travel, and family needs formed a pattern of pressures in which each person tried to protect what felt most important to them. When that kind of pattern is reviewed years later, when relationships have shifted and adults remember what they felt as children, it yields conflicting testimonies that can all be sincere. A writer of biography can neither flatten such differences nor adjudicate them with assurance, and must instead acknowledge that family memory has many rooms. Musk's self-image, glimpsed through remarks and choices, reflects pride in competence and an aversion to pretense. He took pleasure in being able to fix a mechanical fault, to read a map accurately, and to show a visitor which breaker to reset. That sense of practical mastery, often strongest among those trained in applied fields, supported a capacity to keep going when reputation felt fragile. Older men of his generation sometimes measure worth by whether the generator runs when the power fails, and by whether they can find the leak and stop it. The biographical record shows a person for whom those yardsticks mattered as much as, and sometimes more than, a public's approval. Musk's voice in the public square grew steadier as he aged, not louder. The words he chose in interviews were rarely colorful, though the subjects often were, and he used the past tense cleanly, the way a person in a witness box might. Journalists pressed, as they must, and he offered what he wished to offer, whether it was a bare sentence about money in a safe or a simple denial of accusations. The rhythm is familiar to anyone who has known a foreman who never raises his voice but always gets his way. It is not a charm, but it is a kind of presence. Musk's long perspective on South Africa includes the memories of a man who watched a city's street grid thicken and a nation's debate bend and break. He has told interviewers that the streets of his youth felt safer and that purer rules once governed common life, and those feelings, understandable in an older man, do not erase the larger truths that historians have documented about the era. The sentences he offers on that subject are more revealing of his temperament than of the full complexity of the country. He trusted what his senses told him. He favored order, and he argued for what he believed could be accomplished next, not for what a more sweeping moral vocabulary might demand in a single stroke. The biographer's task in such passages is to report faithfully and to hold the tension without forcing resolution. Musk's link to his eldest son's public world took on an unusual aspect when he helped arrange a conversation between the son and South Africa's president, an act that suggests continuing relevance and the persistence of family channels, even when personal ties are strained. That he could be asked to make such a call, and that he could execute it says something about an enduring network of trust, built across years in which he remained a local figure with a national address book. The old counselor's skills had not vanished. In the end, access is a form of capital, and he still possessed some. Musk's private outlook in later life, inferred from what he says and what he does not say, feels calm and plainly drawn. He is capable of harsh judgments and also of stubborn silences, yet he returns to a few themes that never entirely leave him: family, work, and the business of keeping a place in order. The photographs in his rooms carry their own kind of steadiness: the young faces of children, the formal compositions of weddings, the snapshots of fishing trips or small boats, pieces of a story that can be told as either domestic repose or as a prelude to conflict, depending on the narrator. The objects on the shelves, the tools in the drawers, and the way the doors close cleanly all suggest a man who believes care still counts. Musk's legacy, if that word is used carefully, consists of buildings and roads, of children and grandchildren, of public remarks and private choices, and of a presence in debates that reach far beyond Pretoria. He leaves to his children and to those who study the family a set of records that will be compared and weighed for years. In some pages, he appears as a practical, exacting man who could be relied upon to solve problems. In others, he appears as a source of difficulty and pain whose decisions attracted scrutiny and cast long shadows. Both portraits live in the same file, and neither cancels the other. Musk's own words, when placed gently in order, sketch a person more comfortable with facts than with a posture of contrition or triumph. They were confronted by it every day. They did not like it. We had so much money. I took out the guy with the tie. These are not elaborate lines. They are short beams, holding up a narrative that others have built around him, sometimes with admiration, more often with controversy. A listener can take them as clues to a personality that never sought the shape of a public figure, but nonetheless found itself drawn again and again into rooms where the air was charged and the questions were pointed. Musk's life story also teaches a slow lesson about how personal histories are made. There is the record of what happened, documented in certificates, minutes, and newspaper pieces. And there is the record of how people remember what happened, which shifts with feeling and time. The engineer and counselor, who believed in lists and drawings, could not control the second kind of record, and the later chapters of his life, demonstrate how swiftly that second record travels, how it reframes incidents and sentences so that a moment's remark becomes a headline, and how even an old city councilor becomes a symbol in a debate about wealth, power, and responsibility. The scale of that debate changed as his eldest son's work grew from city offices to rocket factories, but the father's part in the story remained rooted in the same habits that guided him in the 1970s. Musk's presence in public in the mid-2020s coincided with a news cycle that had its own velocity. Allegations surfaced, interviews aired, opinions hardened. His denials were categorical, and his words did not waver. The biographical record here must proceed with care, noting dates and claims, and acknowledging that law and journalism sometimes travel at different speeds. It is a period that does not resolve into calm sentences, but the duty of the chronicler is to keep the tone even and to offer the contour of events without either amplifying or dismissing the pain that animates them. Musk's professional accomplishments, modest by the standards of spectacle but concrete in their results, remind a listener that cities are maintained by people who know how to read plans and keep a crew focused. In his prime, he was one of those people, and the suburbs of Pretoria contain traces of his work that do not announce themselves to passers-by. An office park with practical corridors and windows that shade out the afternoon glare, a shop parade with space for deliveries and parking that empties smoothly at closing time, a residential street whose sewer lines do not flood in the summer rain. These are the sorts of things that mark the career of a developer who took pride in doing a job properly. If he told a client that a task would take a certain number of weeks, he expected to be held to it, and he held others to the same standard. Musk's private code in such matters carried over into how he accepted praise and blame. He believed that results speak, and he did not invest in softening language to ease a listener's feelings. He would not be the first to find that such a code, sound in a machine room, may fail in a living room. Yet, people often cannot choose a new nature late in life, and the nature that had served him in council chambers and on building sites remained with him as a grandfather and an interview subject. The low voice, the minimal words, the insistence that the facts were sufficient, these elements recur across accounts of conversations with him. Musk's family circle widened as grandchildren appeared, and the older man's rooms gained drawings and toys that sit oddly beside framed floor plans and old photographs. Visitors who have known him over time report that he still enjoys explaining how things work to the children, just as he did to their parents. A domestic scene of a kettle warming and a child asking why a switch clicks is a scene that repeats in many homes, and within it one recognizes the figure of a person whose comfort lies in explaining and repairing. This gentler image is not offered as a rebuttal to other images, but as part of the whole. Musk's life also contains the kind of minor civic lore that attaches to people who served in quiet offices. Those who remember old Pretoria council debates will recall a councillor who asked pointed questions about costs, who kept notes in a tight hand, and who preferred to summarize his positions without adjectives. Municipal politics seldom yields fame, but it does yield a sense of how a city breathes, and the less